Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We love to take these deep dives into history, and today we're diving into the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth I.
It's gonna be fascinating.
It is. And honestly, like her impact, it's still felt today. And
Mm.
thankfully, we've got some amazing historical accounts that we can really kind of dig into and use to guide us through this whole thing.
Yeah. We have a lot of rich detail to work with, about her early years and the crazy politics of the time and just this remarkable, chain of events that led to her long reign.
Right. And I think that's what we really want to try to uncover,
Yeah.
right? What were the forces at play that kind of led to her destiny and her long-lasting legacy?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Elizabeth, she was born on September 7th, 1533.
Okay.
Now, to really get this, you had to think about her father, Henry VIII.
Right.
He was so obsessed with securing the Tudor dynasty. I mean, the Wars of the Roses, that was still pretty fresh in everyone's minds, all
Yeah.
that chaos and instability. So, of course, everyone wanted a male heir, to make sure things went smoothly.
Yeah. Stability was everything.
Exactly. So while Elizabeth's birth, I mean, it was a big deal, it wasn't the son that everyone was hoping for, was it?
No, it wasn't. I mean, look, the Wars of the Roses had really driven home the need for a clear male successor to kind of avoid all that bloodshed and infighting again. And while Elizabeth was, I guess, technically the heir presumptive, there was still this underlying worry.
Right. And it's amazing how those circumstances, her birth, the whole disappointment surrounding it, and then the brutal fall of her mother, Anne Boleyn, it's almost like it set the stage for everything that was to come.
Oh, absolutely. And for Elizabeth, this wasn't just some abstract historical event. It was her life, her reality, her mom being executed when she was just a toddler. That had to shape how she saw power, how she saw trust, how she saw survival in a court that was ruthless.
Yeah, definitely. Let's kind of dig into her early life a bit. So 3 months after she's born, she gets her own little royal household set up in Hatfield.
Okay.
What's interesting is that a lot of her attendants, they were connected to the Boleyns.
Yeah.
It's almost as if her mother, even though she was queen for a short time, was trying to build this protective bubble around Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think that's a fair interpretation. I mean, think about the pressure Anne was under, but she still made sure Elizabeth had those connections, that support from her side of the family, especially with how quickly things could change at court.
And things did change rapidly.
Right.
Henry's obsession with a male heir, it only got stronger, especially when Anne had those miscarriages.
Yeah.
And then came the accusations, right? Adultery, incest, treason. I mean, most historians now think they were made up just to get rid of her.
Yeah. It was just a brutal power play by Henry. He needed to get rid of Anne to marry someone else and hopefully have a son. So he annuls the marriage, claims it was based on witchcraft, which is,
Wow.
a whole other story. But essentially that makes Elizabeth illegitimate according to the Succession Act of 1536.
And what's striking to me is how differently he treated Elizabeth compared to Mary, his older daughter. With Mary, there were conflicts for sure, especially over the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, but he did eventually, kind of bring her back into the fold.
Right.
But with Elizabeth, it feels like there was this distance, this coldness that lasted much longer. What do you make of that?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, yeah, Henry did reconcile with both his daughters eventually, but with Elizabeth, it was way more complicated. She was a living reminder of the whole break with Rome. That huge controversy over his marriage to Anne
Yeah.
and bringing Mary back, that was easier politically for Henry.
Right. And I remember reading about this letter that Elizabeth's governess, Lady Margaret Bryan, sent to Thomas Cromwell. She's basically pleading with him about the situation at Hatfield. Apparently, Elizabeth was growing out of all her clothes, and they were so short on money that they were poaching deer just to have enough food.
Wow.
It really shows you how vulnerable she was financially after Anne's execution.
Yeah. I mean, that's not just about fancy clothes or anything. That's about basic survival.
Yeah.
The fact they were poaching deer, that shows you how desperate things were.
And then in 1537, finally, Henry gets his son, Edward. Ironically, his mother, Jane Seymour, dies shortly after childbirth, but Edward's arrival did change things up for the daughters, didn't it?
It did. I mean, the pressure was off now that there was a male heir. And even Jane Seymour, on her deathbed, she apparently urged Henry to treat Elizabeth better. It made political sense, I guess, to have backup heirs just in case, even if they weren't technically legitimate.
Right, right. And it's fascinating to kind of picture her, Elizabeth at this time with these descriptions of her. And she apparently looked a lot like Henry.
Yeah.
Reddish hair, fair skin. She even inherited his, what was it, his stubbornness,
Yeah.
that famous Tudor will. But she also had her mother's brown eyes.
Hmm.
Kind of a mix of both, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. A real blend of her parents, not just in looks, but maybe also in personality. And that stubbornness, that would serve her well in the years to come.
Right. And her education, despite all the chaos in her early life, her education was incredible.
I was just going to say, you would think with all the upheaval, she would have had a disrupted education.
Right. By her teenage years, she was fluent in 5 languages.
Wow.
English, French, Spanish, Italian, and Latin. And she could even read Greek and Dutch. There's this great anecdote about an Irish aristocrat presenting her with an Irish dictionary, which is amazing.
Wow.
She really took her studies seriously.
She was clearly a bright, capable young woman. To be fluent in that many languages, especially back then, that's impressive. And the fact that she translated those tough classical texts like Boethius and Tacitus, it shows she wasn't messing around.
Right.
I mean, she was one of the most educated women in Europe at the time. That alone had to give her so much confidence, to deal with foreign dignitaries and scholars.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with her younger brother, Edward, it seems they had a pretty close bond.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They shared tutors, both influenced by the growing Protestant movement. And she even carried the chrism, the baptismal cloth, at his christening. So they were pretty tight.
I see. That Protestant connection, that would become really important later on, especially when you compare it to Mary and her strong Catholic beliefs.
Right, right. It's interesting to think about all the women who stepped in and kind of filled that motherly role for her.
Yeah.
Obviously her governesses, but also her stepmothers.
Mm.
Anne of Cleves, even after she was annulled from Henry, they still kept in touch. And Catherine Parr, she really encouraged Elizabeth's intellectual pursuits and was key in getting her back in the line of succession.
Yeah. These women, they offered stability, support, and intellectual stimulation during some very tough times.
Right.
And Catherine Parr, she saw Elizabeth's potential and she really nurtured it. I think she understood the value of having an educated princess in the royal family.
And then you've got that famous line that Elizabeth supposedly said after Catherine Howard was executed. She said, "I shall never marry." Seeing how vulnerable those royal wives were, it must have really made an impact on her.
Yeah, seeing her mom's fade and then Catherine Howard, that was a lesson in just how precarious a royal wife's position was. It's no wonder she was wary of marriage. That probably played a big part in her decisions later as queen, to stay single.
Yeah. And her close household members like Catherine Cadd, Ashley, and the young William Cecil, they were crucial figures in those early years.
Absolutely. They were her inner circle, advisors, confidants, and they really helped her navigate the complexities of court life, especially during times of uncertainty and danger.
Yeah. By the time her father died in January 1547, Elizabeth was 13. It must have been incredibly complicated for her, knowing what he did to her mother.
Right.
But he did leave her a decent annual income, something like £3,000, which probably gave her a bit of financial independence.
Yeah. Money can't buy you love or erase the past, but it can give you some security and freedom to make your own choices. And that was probably really valuable for Elizabeth, especially with what was coming next.
Right. So Edward VI takes the throne, but he's only 9 years old.
Right.
So it's really Edward Seymour, as Lord Protector, who's running things.
Okay.
Where was Elizabeth during all this?
Well, she was living with Catherine Parr, her stepmother, and Catherine's new husband, Thomas Seymour.
Oh, okay.
But let me tell you, it wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Yeah.
Thomas Seymour, he started acting really inappropriately towards Elizabeth.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Like early morning visits to her bedchamber and things like that. It was a very uncomfortable situation.
Oh.
And what's really weird is that Catherine Parr, at first, she kind of allowed it, even joined in on some of this horseplay, which in hindsight is just, wow.
Yeah.
So understandably, Elizabeth was sent away in May 1548 after a particularly, familiar embrace was discovered.
It's such a messed up situation.
Yeah.
And the fact that Catherine Parr died shortly after that just adds another layer to it.
It does.
But you know who doesn't let a good opportunity go to waste? Thomas Seymour. He then tries to make a move on Elizabeth for marriage. He was in his late 30s. She was 15. Like, come on.
Oh, my gosh.
You're so obviously politically
It
motivated.
was so inappropriate and transparent, right? Marry the king's half-sister and potential heir to the throne, boost your power. Classic.
Right. But luckily, Elizabeth saw right through it.
Yeah.
She totally denied any involvement in his schemes. She was only 15, but she was already playing the game, protecting herself.
Yeah. You have to hand it to her. She was smart. I mean, she must have learned a lot from that whole mess.
Yeah. For the next few years, she pretty much keeps to herself at Hatfield, studying, writing letters to Edward, being very careful.
Right.
But then around 1551, she starts appearing at court more often, presenting this image of a virtuous, dutiful princess. It was strategic, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. After laying low and kind of rebuilding her image, it was time to re-enter the scene. But she had to be careful, especially because of her Protestant leanings.
And speaking of religion, she was definitely sympathetic to the Protestant cause, but she was more moderate than Edward, who was going all in on Calvinism.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the interesting part. She still had some respect for certain Catholic traditions, maybe like her father.
Yeah. Her religious beliefs were this mix of different influences, and that moderation would be really important later on.
Absolutely. Then Edward's health starts to decline, and there's this plot to put Lady Jane Grey on the throne,
Oh, yeah.
a great-granddaughter of Henry VII. It was an attempt to completely skip over Mary and Elizabeth.
Right. Northumberland, he was the one behind it all, desperate to keep the Protestants in power.
And thankfully, William Cecil, he warned Elizabeth and Mary about what was going on.
Good old Cecil, always looking out for her.
Yeah. When Edward died and Lady Jane Grey was briefly queen, Elizabeth made a very smart move. She threw her support behind Mary, even though Mary was Catholic and there was another Protestant contender.
Yeah. That was a big statement, wasn't it? Putting aside her own religious leanings to support the legitimate heir.
Right. It was all about that principle of hereditary succession, making sure things were done properly.
Yeah.
And when Mary entered London in August 1553, there was Elizabeth right by her side. But Mary's reign, it wasn't easy for Elizabeth, especially as the Protestant heir. She became this symbol for the opposition, even when she wasn't directly involved in anything.
It's unavoidable, right? In a hardcore Catholic regime, the leading Protestant figure is going to be seen as a threat.
Right.
Even without her doing anything, people rallied around her, plots were hatched, and things got pretty dangerous.
Like the Wyatt Rebellion in 1554.
Yeah.
That landed her in the Tower of London.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine? Imprisoned in the Tower, the same place so many others had been held and executed. Her life was truly on the line.
I can't even imagine the fear she must have felt.
Yeah, it was during these dark times that her bond with Robert Dudley, her sweet Robin, really grew.
Yeah, but Dudley, he was a controversial figure. His father was involved in the Lady Jane Grey situation.
Right.
And he was already married to Amy Robsart, so it was complicated.
Yeah. And then in April 1555, everything changes again. Mary thinks she's pregnant.
Oh.
Desperate for a Catholic heir, she brings Elizabeth back to court.
Right.
This whole phantom pregnancy thing is just bizarre. Elizabeth even had to be there with Mary in the birthing chamber, waiting for something that never happened.
Talk about awkward.
Right. And then Mary, she asked Elizabeth to stay at court, even gives her more freedom. It's hard to say what she was thinking.
Yeah. Was it genuine sisterly affection? Was it a way to keep an eye on her? Maybe a bit of both.
Yeah. But during those 2 years back in Hatfield, her connection with Robert Dudley only got stronger, which worried her advisors like Cecil.
Of course. Dudley was charming, they had shared interests, but he was not a good political match for a queen.
Right.
You know, the expectation was that she would marry into some powerful European royal family, not someone like Dudley.
And then another huge shift. Mary dies on November 17th, 1558, probably ovarian or uterine cancer.
Wow.
And just like that, Elizabeth becomes Queen Elizabeth I. It must have been such a mix of relief and overwhelming responsibility.
Absolutely. I mean, years of uncertainty and danger, and then she's finally queen. But she inherited a country with some big problems.
Right. Religious divisions, the economy was a mess, and England's position on the world stage was pretty shaky.
A lot to deal with.
A lot to deal with. And the way she handled religion initially, that was brilliant. She didn't rush into anything.
Oh, yeah, that ambiguity was so smart. England still had a lot of Catholics.
Yeah.
And even those who weren't hardcore Catholic, they were tired of all the religious turmoil.
Right. She needed time to build support before making any big moves.
Exactly. And Parliament, they actually granted her the title Supreme Governor of the Church of England without even knowing what her religious policy would be.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. They really wanted stability, and maybe they had some faith in her judgment.
Right. And that title, it was different from her father's supreme head.
Right.
More, I don't know, more flexible maybe.
Yeah.
Less provocative.
Yeah. It didn't alienate as many people. Smart move.
So between 1559 and 1560, she rolls out this Elizabethan religious settlement, a very carefully crafted compromise. She allowed those Catholic vigils for Mary's death. She even attended Latin Mass in private. But she also made it clear that certain Catholic rituals were out.
Yeah, a delicate balancing act.
Absolutely. And her coronation on January 15th, 1559, it was very traditional, very Catholic in its form.
Uh-huh.
But she made these subtle gestures, like withdrawing during the elevation of the host. And the people, they were so excited, they were tearing up pieces of the blue carpet as souvenirs.
Wow, really? That's a great detail.
It is. It shows the mood, the host,
Yeah, yeah.
and the settlement itself. It reinstated the 1549 Book of Common Prayer, but with some revisions.
Okay.
And the language about the Eucharist, that was kept vague on purpose.
I
He
see.
even kept some Catholic vestments and imagery, which upset the Puritans, but helped with the transition for a lot of people.
It was a compromise,
Right.
trying to please everyone a little bit, but most importantly, it avoided all-out religious war in England.
And when you compare it to what was happening in Europe, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre and all that, it's a huge achievement.
It is. She brought a level of religious peace to England that was rare at the time.
Yeah. And strategically appointing Protestant clergy to important positions, that also solidified the move towards a more Protestant England.
Yeah. She created this middle way, a unique English solution that, while it didn't make everyone happy, it kept the peace.
And the penalties for not conforming were pretty light, mostly fines.
Mhm.
So a lot of Catholics, they outwardly conformed, maybe practiced their faith in private.
I see.
There's that quote attributed to her, something like, "There is only one Christ, one faith, all else is a dispute over trifles." It kind of sums up her approach.
Yeah. Pragmatic, focused on the essentials, not getting bogged down in those finer points of theology that divided people so fiercely back then.
Right. But religion wasn't the only problem she inherited. England's administration, the economy, the military, it was all in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, years of Henry VIII spending, wars, bad harvests.
Right.
It had taken its toll.
And this is where William Cecil and Thomas Gresham come in.
Okay.
Cecil, her Secretary of State, a brilliant guy, and Gresham, a financial whiz. They were key in turning things around.
And how did they do that?
Well, by 1561, they'd gotten rid of the old debased currency and replaced it with something more stable,
Makes sense.
which boosted confidence, got trade flowing again. Gresham even founded the Royal Exchange in London, modeled after the one in Antwerp.
Wow. That's impressive. They were a great team.
They were. When it came to the Navy, she was very practical. She focused on building those multi-purpose ships that could be used for trade and for war. And because money was tight, she encouraged private investment in shipbuilding, which was a smart move. And she knew that guys like Drake and Raleigh, they were talented, ambitious.
Oh, yeah.
So she supported their expeditions, which would ultimately pay off big time for England.
It was a win-win, wasn't it? Enriching England, challenging Spain's dominance at sea, all without bankrupting the crown.
Exactly. And her approach to finances, compared to her father, it was night and day.
Right. He was known for being extravagant, but she had a reputation for being quite frugal.
She did, which probably annoyed some of her advisors. But in the long run, it helped keep England afloat.
Yeah. It allowed her to focus resources on the things that mattered, like defense and infrastructure.
Right. But there was one area that constantly drained resources, and that was Ireland.
Ah, yes. Ireland, a thorn in the side of English monarchs for centuries.
Exactly. It was never fully under English control, and she had to deal with rebellions and resistance from figures like Shane O'Neill. Those campaigns to subdue Ireland, they were expensive, and they went on for years.
It was a constant struggle.
And then you have this whole issue of her marriage, or lack thereof.
Right. The never-ending saga of who will Queen Elizabeth marry.
Yeah. As a young, unmarried, childless queen, the pressure on her to marry and produce an heir was enormous.
Absolutely.
Especially with the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, being the next in line.
Yeah, that was a huge worry for the Protestant establishment in England. They didn't want to see a Catholic back on the throne, undoing all that they had fought for.
Right. And early on, it seemed like she was genuinely interested in Robert Dudley.
Yeah, but that was a minefield.
It was. She made him Master of the Horse,
Right.
later Earl of Leicester. But those rumors about their relationship, especially after his wife Amy Robsart died, it made it impossible.
Yeah. The death of Amy Robsart, whether it was an accident or not, it really damaged their reputation.
Right. Most historians today think it was probably an accident.
Yeah,
But back then, the rumors were flying.
right.
So Elizabeth, she went in a different direction. She cultivated this persona of the Virgin Queen, married to her realm, devoted to her people.
A brilliant PR move.
It was. Through her speeches, her portraits, even the art of the time, she created this image of a queen who didn't need a husband to rule effectively.
Yeah. She transcended the traditional expectations of what a female monarch should be.
And yet she kept everyone guessing for decades,
Oh yeah, stringing them along.
stringing those suitors along. Kings, dukes, princes. She entertained them all, but never committed.
I mean, you have to wonder what was going on in her head.
Right. Was it her childhood, seeing her father's messy marital life? Her desire for control? A bit of both, maybe?
Probably.
Yeah,
It's a fascinating psychological puzzle.
it is. So her court, it became this unique place, right? These courtiers, like Dudley, Hatton, Raleigh, and later Essex, they were all vying for her attention, her favor.
A real power struggle, but with a different set of rules.
Yeah. No marriage on the table, just the queen's favor.
Intriguing.
And then in 1562, she gets smallpox.
Oh no.
She survives, but it leaves her face scarred.
Wow.
So she starts using heavy makeup to hide the scars, which probably did more harm than good in the long run. Lead-based foundation, mercury rouge.
Yeah, not exactly healthy beauty products.
Right. And she loved her sweets, so her teeth were in bad shape.
Oh.
It reminds you that even queens couldn't escape the realities of disease and, not so great medical practices back then.
True. And yet, despite all that, her reign is known as a golden age for English culture.
Absolutely. This explosion of literature, theater, music. You have Shakespeare, Marlowe, Spencer, Sidney, so many brilliant artists.
It was an incredible time to be alive creatively.
And a lot of these artists, they had the queen's patronage or the support of her courtiers.
Yeah, the arts flourished under her rule.
And figures like Walter Raleigh, they really embodied that adventurous spirit of the age.
Oh, absolutely.
Poet, explorer, privateer. He even brought tobacco and potatoes back to England.
Right. A true Renaissance man.
Totally. And that whole spirit of exploration, it was also about challenging Spain.
Right. They were the big global power, and England was looking to make its mark.
Exactly. Relations with Spain were going downhill fast, especially after Elizabeth refused to marry Philip II, and the religious differences didn't help.
It was a slow burn towards conflict.
By the 1570s, it was pretty much an unofficial Cold War.
Yeah. But Elizabeth, she was smart about it. She didn't want to jump into a full-blown war with Spain. She used privateers like Drake to harass their ships, and she supported the Dutch rebels. Cost-effective ways to chip away at their power.
Smart, but risky.
Oh, definitely.
And then you have this whole other issue, this constant thorn in Elizabeth's side, Mary, Queen of Scots.
Yeah, that was a problem that just wouldn't go away.
Elizabeth wouldn't acknowledge her as heir. And Mary, as a Catholic with a claim to the English throne, she was dangerous.
Right. She was a rallying point for Catholic opposition.
And Mary's life, it was a soap opera.
Oh, tell me about it.
She returns to Scotland in 1561. There's all this religious and political turmoil.
Right.
Then she marries Lord Darnley, who was also a Catholic,
Yeah.
and had a claim to the English throne through his grandmother, Margaret Tudor. They have a son, James.
Okay.
Then there's an affair with Bothwell. Darnley gets murdered. Mary marries Bothwell.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
She ends up imprisoned, forced to abdicate in favor of her son James, who becomes James VI of Scotland.
It's like something out of a Shakespeare play.
And then she escapes to England in 1568. Talk about a headache for Elizabeth.
Oh, yeah. What do you do with a deposed queen who also happens to be your rival?
Right. She couldn't send her back to Scotland to be executed, but having her in England was a risk.
Yeah. She became a magnet for conspiracies and plots.
Like the Northern Rebellion in 1569, where Catholic nobles revolted.
Right.
And then in 1570, the Pope excommunicates Elizabeth.
Wow.
Things were getting really heated.
Definitely. It put Elizabeth in a tough spot. It was a no-win situation.
It was. So Mary ends up under house arrest in England for almost 20 years, never meeting Elizabeth.
Wow.
It's amazing that Elizabeth didn't execute her sooner.
Yeah. You have to wonder if she hesitated because of what happened to her own mother,
Right. Or maybe she just didn't want to set a precedent of killing another monarch.
Could be. Either way, it shows a certain level of, restraint, maybe even empathy.
Yeah. And during this whole time, you have this guy, Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master.
Walsingham, a shadowy figure.
He was amazing. He uncovered and stopped so many Catholic plots against Elizabeth. He was obsessed with protecting her and the Protestant settlement.
Yeah. He was determined to avoid another St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, but this time in England.
Right. And then finally, in 1586, comes the Babington Plot.
Okay.
This is what Walsingham had been waiting for. Clear evidence linking Mary to a plot to assassinate Elizabeth and put her on the throne.
So this was the tipping point.
It was. Mary was put on trial, found guilty of treason, and executed in February 1587 at Fotheringay Castle.
A momentous decision.
Huge. And Elizabeth, she really struggled with it. She delayed signing the death warrant, almost changed her mind.
Wow.
But the Privy Council, they knew it had to be done.
And they acted.
They did. And this whole Mary Queen of Scots saga, it was happening against the backdrop of this growing tension with Spain.
Yeah. Elizabeth had tried to avoid open war, using privateering and supporting those Dutch rebels.
Right. Hitting them where it hurt without a full-scale invasion.
Exactly. But Spain, they were getting more and more involved in those French religious wars, and they were putting pressure on the Netherlands.
So in 1585, Elizabeth signs the Treaty of Nonsuch, officially pledging English support to the Dutch.
A bold move.
It was. And it pushed Philip II over the edge. He started planning the Armada.
Wow.
Drake's raid on Cadiz in 1587, that bought some time. But in July 1588, the Spanish Armada set sail for England.
The moment of truth.
It was. The English fleet was smaller, but more maneuverable, and their tactics, combined with some bad luck for the Spanish, well, it was a disaster for the Armada.
With the fire ships at Calais, the storm in the North Sea, it was a crushing defeat.
Yeah. And during all of this, Elizabeth delivers that iconic speech at Tilbury, rallying her troops. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king and of a king of England, too. Chills, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a speech for the ages.
It is. Though by that point, the danger had mostly passed, it didn't matter. It became this symbol of her strength and defiance.
It did, a defining moment in her reign.
But even though the Armada was defeated, the war with Spain dragged on until 1604. And the later years of Elizabeth's reign, they weren't easy. The economy was strained, there were bad harvests, and she lost a lot of her close advisors.
Yeah, that period after 1588, it was almost like a different reign.
Right. The old guard was gone.
Yeah.
And then there's the 9 Years' War in Ireland, starting in 1593.
Oh, yeah, that was a brutal one.
It was. Hugh O'Neill and Hugh O'Donnell led the rebellion, and they were good. Modern tactics, even got help from Spain.
Oh, wow.
And the English, they got crushed at the Battle of the Yellow Ford in 1598. Elizabeth had to pour resources into Ireland just to hang on.
That must have been frustrating for her, after all her efforts to be financially prudent, then this huge drain on the treasury.
And to top it all off, there was the Essex affair.
Yeah, that was messy.
It was. Essex, her favorite for so long, he completely went off the rails. Well, he had this unauthorized meeting with O'Neill in Ireland, then came back to England without permission, got stripped of his titles, and then tried to launch a rebellion in 1601. It was a disaster. He was executed.
Talk about a fall from grace.
Right. It really took a toll on Elizabeth. You can see it in her later portraits. She's aged, her energy's gone.
It's heartbreaking in a way.
It is. And through all of this, Robert Cecil, he's the one who's really running things.
Right. Steady, reliable Cecil.
He starts secretly negotiating with James VI of Scotland about the succession.
Okay.
Elizabeth, she never formally named James as her heir. But it was pretty clear that's what she wanted. She knew the Tudors were coming to an end, and she was preparing for a Stuart to take over.
And it worked. The transition to James I, it was pretty seamless.
It was. And in the month after Elizabeth's death, a lot of those long-standing issues were finally resolved. The Irish rebellion was crushed, and England made peace with Spain.
So it was like a new chapter for England.
Exactly. And those early voyages and attempts at colonizing North America that Elizabeth had supported, well, they laid the groundwork for what would happen under James I.
Yeah. Her influence, it stretched far beyond her own reign.
It did. So when you look back at Elizabeth, it's amazing, right?
Yep.
She guided England through huge challenges, made it a Protestant power, defeated the Spanish, set the stage for global expansion. Expert.